If you'll remember in the last talk, we were discussing the notion of values and how important values are in creating architectural form. So we talked about the fact that architecture inevitably is an indeterminate equation. No matter how much you know about the problem, there's not going to be one and only one solution. And part of what lets us get to a solution in architecture, because in the end, it's bricks and mortar, it is a solution to the problem. But the way we get to that determinate solution is through values. And so today we're going to be discussing how values shape architectural form. So if you recall from the last talk, we were discussing these three German architects, Hugo Herring, Mies van der Rohe, Albert Speer. And we talked about their lifestyles, their character, their personality, and their values, what they believed in, what they felt strongly about in architecture. And all three of these were very, very, one could even say opinionated, but very, very adamant about what they believed in architecture. And today we're going to take those values and we're going to look at how that got translated into architectural form. We're going to start with Hugo Herring. As I mentioned, Hugo Herring was this nebbish but very vocal kind of guy. He believed that architecture was this spiritual, emotional process. He believed that every building should have its own unique character. I believe that there are no universals of beauty. Beauty is completely relative. But the very most important value is that he believed that function drives architecture, and that architectural form should be an expression of that function. So in his very early career, he's doing buildings like this. This is a residential complex. It's in Berlin, actually never got built, but it was a project for it. And in it, he was talking about movement. He said, architecture petrifies and lays down once and for all the movement of life. And he was not happy with architecture that was so static and so rigid, and much more interested in architecture that was like we move in a fluid kind of way. Why is it that architecture can't take that same kind of form? This was another competition entry he did near the railway station, one of the main railway stations in Berlin. And there are people who are surging and moving and coming and going, and so the architectural form takes those surging, moving, dynamic kinds of shapes in it. This is a wonderful little building. Again, didn't get built. A lot of his buildings didn't get built. But in this particular one, he's designing a competition entry for a building for the Berlin Secession. I talked about in the last talk these organizations that were in Berlin, which were kind of artists and architects and people who came together and had exhibitions and had dialogue and had conferences and really talked about issues of art and architecture and society and things like that. He was very involved, Hugo Herring, in Der Ring. This one was for one of those other organizations called the Berlin Secession. And in it, we can see very clearly this emphasis on function and how form came out of function. So the program for this involved some offices for the people who were running the organization. It involved some conference spaces for members coming and meeting. These are static functions. I'm sitting in an office, I'm still. A rectilinear form is appropriate for that. In a conference room, I'm around a table. The room basically takes the proportion of that gathering around a table function. But another very important function in the building is this exhibition space. And you would have come in on the lower floor and you would sweep up this stair like that. And then what is an exhibit like? Well, when we're in an exhibit, we're wandering around, we're moving over here, we're looking at this, we're moving over there, we're looking at that. It's a fluid much more dynamic kind of activity. And so he's making architectural forms that have that kind of fluidity to them. I want to read a quotation from him in this regard. He says, the architectural image can only be discovered through a study of the function. I want to examine things to allow them to discover their own images. So he's really thinking through, what is this function? How can I allow it to discover its own image? How can I find within it the shape and form that's just right for that function? And in 3 dimensions, we see this building, part of it being very static and very rectilinear. And then at the moment when it comes alive and there's an activity and there's a reception or an exhibition opening, we see that dynamism expressed in the building itself. This is a plan of one of the houses that Hugo Herring did in the 1930s. And he did a bunch of these. Some got built, some did not get built. I love these houses. You look at that plan and you think, oh my God, what kind of drugs were this guy on? I mean, it's crazy. It looks like a train crash together. But then when you actually study it and look at it, you realize, oh my God, it is so careful in terms of understanding each function of the house and how it gets expressed in architectural form. So you would have come in here at the entry, and the very first thing you do is, in good German fashion, you wash your hands at the sink, and there's a little toilet right there. You get clean, all hygiened up from being out in the nasty world and coming into the house. And then there's a stair that kind of sweeps you upstairs. You go into the living room here, and the living room is a whole series of little vignettes, little small functions, like it's wonderful to gather around the fireplace and have chairs in the hearth and keep yourself warm. It's a cold climate in Germany. What a wonderful little ensemble around that activity of sitting by the fire and enjoying that. And then right next to it is a kind of built-in sofa. Those chairs can move around and you can have a kind of conversation area apart from the fireplace. But in that sofa area, you're also close enough to be warmed by the fireplace. Over here, there's a little place for music where you can sit and play the piano and see out to the garden out here. Just the perfect spot for the piano and the music and the view, all of it just perfectly orchestrated. So when you might have a party, again, now there's this fluid movement between all of these spaces, and indoors and outdoors. And he's thinking of all sorts of scenarios for how that living room might work. The kitchen is incredibly innovative. At this point, a German kitchen would have been just a rectilinear room. You'd have a big old stove over here. You'd have a big old refrigerator over there. You'd have a big old freestanding double sink over here. But he's rethinking the kitchen. He's thinking of it as, how do I produce a meal? Where are my workspaces? What is my workflow? And he makes this very efficient kitchen through here. A kitchen that these days we'd look at it and say, oh, that's not so different from the kitchen in the house I grew up in. But in 1930, function driving a form for the kitchen was a new idea. And he was creating this very efficient kitchen right there. I love the dining room. What is dining about? It's about the family gathering around the table, that kind of nodal function. And out of that, we get exactly that kind of form in the shape of the house. Again, a quotation from Hugo Herring. He says, "A house may be bred out of forms arising from work performance. The house may be looked on as man's second skin, and hence a bodily organ." God, I love that idea. If you just think of how your hand is a bodily organ, and how do you get the shape of that hand? Well, it has to do with being able to grasp. It has to do with being able to shake hands. It has to do with being able to slap. It has to do with everything a hand needs to do. And your fingers and your hand are shaped perfectly to do that. How can I make a building that's like a bodily organ, that so perfectly reflects its function? Another quotation from Hugo Herring. He said, "Life is given to a building by awakening, fostering, and cultivating the essential form enclosed within." So that's his mission. His mission is to figure out a way to make the building a real reflection of function. On the left, we see the stair. It just says stair. It says going up, vertical. It says that kind of fluid movement of our body going up, not this kind of static rectilinear thing that most stairs would have been. Now, we're going to concentrate on one building by Hugo Herring here. And I've chosen this building because it's one of the most complete projects he ever did. It actually is, this is the cow barn we're going to focus on, but it actually is a whole ensemble of buildings that he did for a farm in northern Germany near Lübeck called Gut Garkau. And in it, even the site plan is very much driven by function. So you would have come in over here, there'd be the house for the farm family there. Nearby that house would be the hen house. Generally, it was the woman of the house who did domestic duties in the house, but she also took care of the chickens. So the chicken house was very near her primary domestic focus of her work over here. Then there was the granary where they stored all of their food for the animals. And then there was the work shed here. That's a kind of a place for wagons and carts and equipment and all the things they need in their farming. And then there are three different barns. There's a pig barn here. There's a horse barn there. There's a cow barn there. So as you're going from the house to the fields, you'd go by the work equipment to go out to the fields there. If you're going to tend the animals, you'd go by the granary and where all the food was and equipment for the animals to go to the pig or the horse or the cow barn. The cow barn and the horse barn are near the fields out here because you pasture cows and horses. The pig barn is over here by the water. This is a lake right there. And they're near the water because you slop pigs and you need the water. You don't pasture pigs. So the pigs are where they need to be associated with that. The horses and the cows are where they need to be. The grain, the equipment, everything is exactly where it needs to be for function. And then this little area up there, that's the dung heap. That's where all the manure produced by the pigs and the horses and the cows. Right by there is this place where you put the manure. And the manure is just as far away from the house as it possibly could be because obviously it's extremely stinky. So everything in that is perfectly associated with form. And then in the three-dimensional architectural character of these, each of them has its own expression. I talked about in his values, each building has its own character. So if you're making a granary, that makes one kind of shape. If you're making a cow barn, that's another kind of shape. If you're making a pig barn, it's another kind of shape. If you're making a home, it's a completely different kind of shape. So the architecture is coming very much out of the function of the building. So we're going to focus in on this cow barn right there. And we're going to focus on the cow barn because I know cows and I totally relate to this building. So I grew up in a rural community. We always had stock and had pastures and barns and that sort of thing. And I was in like the 4-H and exhibited the animals at the county fair. No one in Texas does that anymore, but hey, that used to be quite a thing. So I, in the process of that, I know what cows are like. And it's remarkable to me how completely Hugo Herring understood cows. So number one, you gotta understand cows are incredibly stupid animals. To get them to do anything is a chore. And these poor dairy farmers, they have to get the cows to come in every morning and milk them. And they have to get them to come in every afternoon and milk them again. So it's pretty important that all this process works as smoothly and efficiently as possible. So there are two things about cows that clearly Hugo Herring understands. The first is that cows play follow the leader. So if you can get the lead cow to go where you want them to go, then the cows will actually organize themselves single file and will go in that direction. That's just how cows move as a herd. Then the other thing is to understand the physiognomy of a cow, which although it's a four-legged beast like a horse or a dog, it doesn't move like a horse or a dog. Because of the way their shoulders and their front legs are attached, they can't pivot like a horse. If a horse is going forward like this and they want to turn left, they just pivot and make the turn. A dog can do the same thing. But a cow can't do that. They can't make their shoulder and leg pivot. So if you want to make them turn left, you have to make them very gradually move a little by a little by a little by a little and turn left. If you try to just put them on a halter and make them turn like that, they can't make that work. They don't know how to do that. So Herring totally gets this in this plan. So he's making the cows come in single file like this, and then they're moving very slowly. They turn left around like that and move back out. So you move them in, get the cow in the stall, you're milking the cow. When you're through, there's that fluid movement like that. Remarkably sensitive to the way cows move. Then there are areas around it. This is the hay storage area. This is the grain storage area. This one has a hay loft above it where you would send the bale down, break the bale, and then you would, with a pitchfork, you would take that hay and you would move it into here and put it in the feed trough for the cows. Now, when you're pitching that hay, you as a human being have a certain radius of reach like that. And that is a perfect reflection of you there and that radius of reach. And what he's trying to do here is create no corners. Because if the hay gets stuck in that corner, then it'll mildew. You want to make sure that it's easy to get all of that hay out every single time. And the same thing is happening in the grain storage right here. But the shape of those forms, it's not, God, that was a cool ass shape. It's totally generated by the kind of shape of a human being working like that and creating that radius. So the cows are eating at the trough, you're milking them, you bring the milk into that central section, which is the human section, and then you take the milk out and put it in the milk storage area over here. Again, the shape and form of every piece of that building is being generated by function. So that's where you store the hay up above, you pitch the hay down below, and that's that radius area where you're able to easily get to all the parts of the hay and not leave anything in a corner. The windows in this are at exactly eye height right here for a human being. You do not want the cows seeing outside at all because they'd be distracted. You don't want the cows distracted. You want them totally focused on getting in their stall and not being spooked by anything outside. And yet the humans want to be able to see, is there a stray cow out there still? What's the weather doing? Is that storm coming up? So you need the window just at eye height for the human beings for function, and that's what creates the architectural form. In this era in Germany, they made buildings out of two materials primarily, out of board and batten wood or out of brick. And so the building is made out of board and batten wood and brick, and that gives it its material character. Everything in the building is so carefully considered according to the values of Hugo Herring. The importance of the individual building, of the expression of that building, of its function, all of that is generating architectural form. Now, the second person we're looking at here is Mies van der Rohe. Mies van der Rohe, as I mentioned last talk, he's very good friends with Hugo Herring. And for a while, they even shared an office space. And yet, he has completely different ideas about architecture. So Mies van der Rohe, in his early career, when Hugo Herring was doing that wiggly residential building, he was doing these office buildings made out of steel and concrete, which at the time were very new materials. And his idea was that architecture needs to come out of construction. It should express the spirit of its age. And now we have these new technologies. We have reinforced concrete, we have steel, we have large sheets of glass we can do. We need to completely reinvent the way we build an office building based on these new technologies. So we'd look at this building now and say, well, that's not so different. That's just like a big concrete office building. But honestly, it's kind of Mies van der Rohe who's inventing this vocabulary and really starting the notion of what a modern office building is. This is one of Mies van der Rohe's very most famous projects. This is the Barcelona Pavilion in Barcelona, Spain. It was done by Mies van der Rohe for the 1929 World's Fair in Barcelona. And this was the German pavilion in that fair. So it was made as an exhibition building. And we could look at the plan of that building and you look at it and say, well, what is the function? I don't know. I mean, as he depicts this, what he's depicting it as is walls, that's construction, and the series of columns that you see there, that's construction. And it's really made out of these incredibly slender steel columns, chrome-plated steel columns, and then these walls. So it really is construction that he's talking about. But function, well, you know, it was a lot of different things. Sometimes there were exhibits that were put in here. Sometimes there were receptions. He actually designed those two chairs, which were designed for the Barcelona Pavilion, and they were for a reception when the King and Queen of Spain were coming to the Barcelona Pavilion. So sometimes there were events like that in there, but it isn't really driven by function. It's driven by construction and materials, these beautiful marbles, this soft frosted glass. And it's really that reinforced concrete plane of the roof and these slender columns that are holding it up. That's what's generating the architectural character. Here's a great example of construction generating form. This is what's generally called the brick country house. It was another one of those projects that never got built, like Hugo Herring's projects sometimes didn't get built. These guys were on the cutting edge. And in this case, he's looking at how would we build a house out of brick? And so it starts with thinking of brick as a kind of earthen material. So we're holding up the earth and retaining a wall out of brick there. And then you build these big, solid, thick brick walls, and you make the windows as the voids between those brick walls. And the plan is really a series of brick walls interlocking with each other. Now, you could look at that plan and say, where's the bathroom? I have no idea where the bathroom is here. Or where's the kitchen? I don't know. I don't know where bedrooms or living room, or it really isn't generated by function. It's generated by this notion of how do you build authentically in this heavy brick material? And then how do you make openings in it that don't violate that notion of the big solid brick wall? This is a house he did that did get constructed, the Lang House in Krefeld, Germany. This one, every single bit of that house is made out of brick. Brick floors, brick walls, and everything is based on the module of a brick, so that all dimensions in the building are really shaped to that brick. After Mies immigrated to the United States, he did this project for the Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. He was a faculty member there, and he was designing a whole new campus for IIT. And it was an existing fabric of the city like that, and he's completely hollowing it out and redoing it and making a completely new kind of campus there. As you can see, the buildings are completely unlike Hugo Herring, who even in a little farm complex did very, very different buildings. In this case, all of the buildings are very similar to each other. Mies did not believe that every building needed to be unique. He thought there were principles that could be broadly applied. That is the physical plan of the building, the kind of utility center. Just off the image here, there's a chapel at IIT, about the same size as that, and honestly, they look pretty much the same. So the function of a power plant, the function of a chapel, although those are very different, they wouldn't necessarily create a different architectural form. And that's true all over the campus. Some of these campus buildings are a library. Some of them are student housing. Some of them are laboratories. Some of them are classrooms. But all of them share the same vocabulary, which is this steel frame with an infill that's in brick and in large sheets of glass. So that the entire campus has this homogeneity, and it also has this technological expression. That was very appropriate for IIT. It's an institute of technology, and the technology of building is very much generating the character of their new campus. This is a final building I want us to look at by Mies van der Rohe, one of his most famous buildings, which is the Farnsworth House. It was done for a single woman, Edith Farnsworth, just outside of Chicago in Plano. It's on a beautiful site, very pristine natural site by the Fox River. And you can see in the plan of this house, it is just kind of one single room made of glass. And then there's a porch in the front right there, and then there's a terrace off to the side right there. But that plan is extremely flexible. Actually, Mies van der Rohe said, here's a quote from him, he said, "The architect should, like a good gardener, bind the tender plant of life to a grid or a trellis, giving it support and, by that very fact, freedom." So his notion is not to put a straitjacket on function, but to make a grid or a trellis, and to then let architectural function find its own shape or form within that. And that's exactly what's happening in the plan here. It's a very open space. There's kind of a sleeping area over here, maybe, a storage for clothes there. There's a kitchen back over here. Right here, there's a dining room table there. There's a little sitting area here, another one over here. But you could easily move the dining room table over here closer to the kitchen. You could easily put the bed back over here. It's completely flexible. He's letting it be driven by this notion of a grid or a trellis and letting the life occupy the space within it. So there it is on this beautiful natural site. The Fox River sometimes floods, so the whole building is put up on stilts like that so that it sits very high on the site. Beautiful views out. Very explicit steel frame. We see those steel columns catching the steel beam here and here. Even the stair, we see the stringer expressed as a steel element, the supports that go across, the treads then in stone on top of that. Everything made almost like tinker toys so that you're seeing the construction of the building. And then inside, just these big, simple open spaces with huge sheets of glass that open you to the outdoors and create a very flexible space inside for living however you want to. Mies van der Rohe, one of his quotes was, "God is in the details," so he's very meticulous about all of that. But it's a beautiful example of construction as it is generating architectural form, the primary value of Mies van der Rohe. The third of these architects we want to talk about is Albert Speer. And again, you remember the values he had. He was Hitler's architect. It's very much about creating awe and wonder and drama, and very much a connection to great empires of the classical eras, Greece and Rome, and very much a focus on building this leader, Adolf Hitler. So he was a young man when he first got commissioned to become the architect for Adolf Hitler. And at that point, they kind of tried him out on a project that was for a rally that was to be in Nuremberg. It was the Tempelhof rally ground. Hitler loved to have these big rallies. That was a lot of how he got popular. And he was a very good speaker. But he also understood how important the setting was for the rally. And he always wanted a kind of architectural background for these events to happen. So they had Albert Speer create this background for the Tempelhof rally. And so he had this idea of, he not only made the big stage setting very dramatic there, the place where Hitler would speak from here, all of his sycophants and assistants around him there, and then the teeming masses of people here, and there would be military marches and bands, and then the climax would be Hitler giving this rousing Nazi speech. But for this, there was a really big idea in Speer's head. He decided that around the parade ground, he would place 140 Klieg lights. And these were big, high-intensity lamps, and shoot them right straight into the sky. And the people would gather before it was dark, and then slowly as it got darker and darker, it would make this cathedral of light. So it was like columns of light that were defining the space of the rally. And there were lights shining on all these Nazi flags. They would have been red and black and white, and there's the music, and there's the light, and there's the speech, and it was a tremendous success, extremely emotional, very powerful. And that's actually what got Albert Speer the job of being the architect for the Third Reich. Shortly after that, he was commissioned to do this parade ground in Nuremberg, basically on that site. Again, it's a mammoth project, this huge stadium, 2 large parade grounds here, a big conference center there. The stadium would have seated 400,000 people. That's 4 times as much as Darrell K. Royal Memorial Stadium here. Would have been 6 football fields long, 5 football fields wide. The space of it would have been 3 times the volume of the pyramid at Cheops. Massive, massive stadium. The parade grounds would have had this sense of grandeur and awe of ancient Rome, very powerful, giving a sense of majesty. This is what it looked like at the time it was finished. These are kind of the ruins of it that exist more or less today. And while it was under construction, one day Hitler and Speer were out there and talking about the building, and they were making it out of reinforced concrete, most of the complex. That was general technology of the day. And then they began to think, wait, we're building for immortality here. We want people 2,000 years from now to look back at the Third Reich like we look back at Roman times. And if we're going to do that, what's it going to look like when reinforced concrete falls apart and you have this rebar sticking out and it's rusting and staining the concrete? This is not going to make beautiful ruins, and we want beautiful ruins. So they switched and began to make the buildings out of solid granite. So this conference center is made out of these massive blocks of granite so that it would make a beautiful ruin. And in fact, portions of the complex, as this is how it was originally, this is how it was several years ago when I was visiting it, and it's making rather a beautiful ruin, so that's being accomplished. So another project that he did for Hitler, this was Hitler's headquarters, the new state chancellery in Berlin. This would have been the front of it on a major street in downtown Berlin. That would have been that front right there. And you would have gone through there into a courtyard, through a portal, into a beautiful reception hall, into a domed space, down a long gallery here, and finally into Hitler's headquarters with a huge conference room and his office down at the end. This is orchestrated to tell you you're about to see the big man, the very, very important Adolf Hitler. So you go through that courtyard, into the portal, then into this beautiful reception hall with marble, inlaid marble on the walls, beautiful light from above. And then from there you go into this grand rotunda. And from the rotunda, then you go into this gallery, lit on one side, ancient tapestries, beautiful finishes. You click, 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 walking down, down, down this area. And finally, you get to Hitler's conference room or to his office, this huge, grand office with Hitler behind the desk here. And the message is given by the architecture. The architecture tells you the importance of this man you're seeing. And this was something Speer and Hitler were doing at the scale of Berlin, as well as the scale at individual buildings. This was a massive complex that he was creating, which was part of a larger plan for Berlin. There would be a grand new axis cut through the city. All the black areas here were existing fabric. All the white were new construction that they were planning. This is a grand boulevard that would be 2.5 times the length of the Champs-Élysées. There would be a great assembly hall at one end. There would be the Arc of Triumph right here. It would connect the train station, the airport, into this grand axis of the city. This assembly hall would have been unbelievable. If you can see right here, that is a building that still exists there, the Reichstag. That's kind of the Capitol building for Germany now. That building's about the size of the state capitol here in Austin. So you can get a sense of, if that's the size of the state capitol, imagine the size of that great assembly hall. It was 16 times the volume of St. Peter's. The diameter of that dome was 5 times the diameter of St. Peter's. It would have been an incredible, incredible space. There you can see the tiny little people down here. You could have fit a 60-story building inside the interior of that space. Now, that was Speer with a different set of values than Mies van der Rohe or than Hugo Herring, really making buildings out of a value system that he had. And in all 3 of these cases, I think it demonstrates how important values are in generating architectural form. Okay, see you next time.